Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. And on this week's episode, Aaron, am sitting down and talking with my dad, the Reverend Dr. Bob Gerke. And we're having a conversation about, well, what it's like to be fathers and grandfathers, and in connection with, what it means that God is our Heavenly Father. As always, our goal in this podcast is that you'll hear us talking about something that will inspire you to go start another conversation with somebody else about Jesus. As always, we hope you enjoy this conversation, and I'm pleased now to introduce you to my dad, Bob Gerke. But we always start with a real cheers, but you could virtual cheers me. Clink.
Oh yeah, should have brought one of my deal. Oh, so I'm supposed to click on OK, aren't I?
Oh, yeah. To accept the recording. Yeah, there you go.
All
right.
Anyway, cheers. Cheers. Or whatever.
Well, for all my friends out there, this is Bob Gerke. We are related. Some of you know Bob. Many of you know Bob. A lot of you don't. So this is my dad. And happy Father's Day, Dad.
Happy Father's Day to you as well, my dear son.
Oh, thanks, Dad. I learned all the best things from you. This morning, I sneezed, and I thought it was really loud, and I said, "Wow, that was a Grandpa Bob's sneeze," and the kids said, "I don't think it was because it didn't scare us." So there you go. I'm trying, Dad.
Well, we all know my sneezes are definitely on the loud side.
And you do. Hey, we're airing this one a couple of days after Father's Day, but a couple of days after Trinity Sunday, and you usually sneeze 3 times in a row, don't you? One for the Father, one for the Son, and one for the Holy Spirit.
No, I don't do that. Dave does.
Oh, really?
Dave Hines does that if he does that when he's sick, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. I think you should pay attention.
Well, I usually just do one big one, and it's really loud.
It is. Well, hey, I don't know if you knew, but a while ago, Mom was on this podcast. Did you know that?
What? Oh, I think I remember hearing about
Kevin and I had both of our moms on. So now it's your turn, Dad.
All right.
But we don't have much of an agenda other than just having a conversation. But I do have a little agenda, which is, in honor of Father's Day, we should talk about life and talk about fatherhood and those kinds of things. So, I don't know when there are things I've heard stories, about my mom saying to you, that's a Gus thing, because your dad's name is Gus, so you would do things that Grandpa Gus would do. And now in my house, like the sneezes and lots of other stuff, there are Bob-isms that are done. Were those intentional things, Dad, or you just how does this work?
Well, my father, Grandpa Gus. So as you and I are in, let's just put it this way. As you are to me, I am to my father.
Right.
And therefore, having been raised in a household with my father, with all of his jokes, and if you remember, Grandpa Gus loved to tell jokes.
He did love to tell jokes.
And Grandma used to be there saying, Gus, they've already heard that one before. And of course, Dad would continue to tell the story anyway, because that's just the way Dad was. But, and you remember, you had some opportunities when I would go to the meetings up in Brainerd, and I would bring you to be with Grandpa.
Yeah. Yeah, we have, because our family has a little cabin in the woods, affectionately called the Sugar Shack.
Right.
And that was the place, I mean, because you guys got that when you were a kid?
when I was 6. Yeah,
When you were 6.
yeah, five or six. We used to go to a resort up in near Brainerd, or I don't know, somewhere like that. And I have many stories about that, of course, with my dear brother John, of course, who's less than a year older than I am. So we have many stories that John and I, talk about. But anyway, about Dad. So a lot of the things that Dad did are traits that um, I have as well, because Dad was outgoing and Dad liked to talk, and Dad would, you know, stay and talk with people. And Dad was very involved in the church. He
Hmm.
wasn't a pastor, of course, but he taught Bible class and taught youth Bible class. Anyway, the
Oh, did
bottom
he?
line
I don't
is,
know if I knew that.
yeah. So that's where I figured I should probably throw in some of that stuff too.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah. But I think one of the things about being so you learn about being a dad from your dad,
Right.
right? And one of the great stories, you probably have heard me say these stories, but
I
since other
won't. I
people haven't.
won't. I won't tell you to stop,
Yeah,
like
well,
grandma did.
I have many stories, of course. And I've shared these with people in the church and stuff like that, because I think that there's two stories that I'll just share with you right off the bat, that um my dad and or mom, taught John and I. One of those was that we were not supposed to steal, right? And take anything.
Hmm.
So once upon a time, when we were up at that resort that I said when we were younger, so I was probably 4, let's just say, and John was 5. And we happened to go into that area that they always have at a resort, where you can go. There's like kind of a bar, and there's candy bars sometimes behind the area and stuff like that. And one time, John, and of course, we loved candy. So one time, John said to me, "Quick, grab a candy bar. Nobody's there." So we went behind there, and we went to get a candy bar. And John grabbed one really quick, because he is very decisive when it comes to his little ideas.
What kind was it?
I don't know. It was probably a salted nut roll, knowing him. I
Ah,
think we both really like salted nut rolls and nut goodies. Back in those days, they were like 10 cents, or maybe even
wow.
5 cents. At any rate, sadly, I was not very decisive, and I was still trying to make my decision when the guy came in. So, needless to say, he brought us to Dad,
Yeah.
whatever. And we had to say, I don't know what all we said. We probably said we're sorry. But anyway, it prevented us from the life of crime.
Just one, yeah, one time, and that was it, huh?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and then the other thing is, one time John and I were playing hide and seek in our house. And in our house back in the day, in our closets, we just had the outer edge, and then, the inner edge, the inside, they painted and stuff like that. But it was really more of oh, what's the really thin stuff? Wood that's not ply, well, kind of a
Laminate.
plywood, laminate,
Uh,
whatever. Anyway, it didn't have a lock on the two, but the two doors, came together like this, and they had the handles on there. Well, I was inside there hiding, and John put some kind of rope or something around it, and he wouldn't let me out. So of course I had to push on it.
yeah.
And when I pushed on it, I kind of cracked, that laminate.
Did you get in
And
trouble for that?
mom heard it.
Uh,
And when mom heard it, she said, "You wait till your father gets home."
uh-oh.
Now, Dad never beat us.
Uh,
Dad never took a belt out at us. Dad never did anything like that. At least I don't remember anything like that. But John and I knew that meant we're going to get spanked. Maybe mom even said we are going to get spanked. She probably did,
yeah.
because we knew we deserved it. So John and I decided we got to do whatever we can to try to help ours, to keep us from, being in pain and suffering. So first we tried to put pillows behind our jeans with our little butts. Well, pillows are a lot bigger than that, so that didn't work very well. And I think we eventually probably put some comic books, because Dad used to go on trips, and when Dad would come back from his trips, he used to give us comic books. So we had all these series of comic books that we used to watch and stuff like that. And when Dad got home, I don't even think he did anything. I mean, he probably did, but I don't think. Let's put it this way. I remember the fear of how we were going to be punished, much more so
Yeah.
than the actual punishment. So
Yeah. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, they say.
exactly, exactly. So, oh, there are so many more stories I could
Uh,
about Dad. But some of what there are some really fun stories about Dad though too.
yeah.
Like Dad used to take us, fishing
Hmm.
and brook trout fishing up at the cabin and everything else. Oh, well, up in the north and stuff like that. So, and then Dad had a boat and we used to go, fishing. One of the really fun times though was when all my four brothers and I and Dad went up to Upper Red Lake, and Dad rented two boats because up there they had a walleye up the wazoo.
Mm.
And so we were in a cabin, and it was just really fun, just us, as far as the guys.
Mm.
And you know how guys are that, especially when women aren't around, it's
A little different.
um yeah, it's different.
Just use your imagination. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but anyway, and it was a lot of fun. So
Yeah, well,
anyway,
I have a lot of, I mean, the similar, similar kinds of memories of when you took Seth and I to the Boundary Waters a couple of years. I don't even know how many times we did that. In my mind, it seems like a lot, but I think it was only maybe two or
it
three,
was two.
two. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, canoeing up there with other family friends of ours, another dad and two boys those are, I don't know, like foundational memories, something very totally different. I just remember, I don't know if went to the same place both times, but I remember one time we stayed on an island, and that was just like a boy's dream come true because you guys just said go play, and
Right.
oh man, my imagination just went wild.
Yeah, you and the boys, and then and John was allergic to fish. The other,
Yeah.
he was a pastor too, and if you remember, and then but I brought along my fishing pole anyway with all
Yeah.
my bobbers, and you guys kept taking my fishing pole and bobbers, and you kept hitting them on the rocks. I don't even know if I came back with any bobbers, but
I don't, did we catch fish?
no,
No.
no, you guys were just having fun, and I just kind of like whatever.
Right.
I'm not a huge fisherman anyway, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference to me. So,
Yeah.
but remember though, when we were up there with John, and then John had his two boys that went. Poor Catherine got left behind, but that's another story. Anyway, this is the story where your brother Seth was not happy with me. If you remember, I had to because you and Seth were much bigger than Matt and Pete.
Oh yeah.
So I had Seth go with John and Seth had to be in the front
Yeah,
and you were
yeah.
with me. And
Uh-huh.
I knew anyway, and my way of steering was my way so we could move a lot faster
Uh-huh.
by using the rudder, whereas John used those J strokes and C strokes and he'd put it in and then it'd be like putting a brake on it. Seth said to me later, he goes, Dad, can I go with you?
Yeah.
I told him he had to stay with John. So,
Yeah. That's
but
the sacrifices those older brothers have to make.
oh yeah. Well, some of those times of going with you and Seth,
Mm.
as well as when we went up to with Dave, our DCE, and then we went up to the VB to do those VBSs out on the Indian reservation.
Yeah.
You know, those were,
Oh,
some of the best.
that's super memorable. Yeah, we
Yeah,
went to Cass Lake in northern Minnesota. I think the first time was I think I was going into seventh grade, between sixth and seventh grade. That was
yeah,
the pilot year, I guess, and then we went back year after year. I even went. I think I went every summer, even after my freshman year of college. So however many 6 7 years in a row.
yeah.
I would. I mean, I in my memory, like those experiences are foundational for why I ended up even like considering being a pastor. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's lots of stuff in there, but that was really eye opening. Of like, man, I really enjoy telling people about Jesus, but especially those who are far from him and, live in broken lives and that kind of stuff. Um, but I actually still didn't want to be a pastor though for quite a while. And I blame it on you, but it wasn't really your fault. I think it was other people's fault. And it's my own fault that I get from you, which is stubbornness and independence. And, people would tell me that I was going to be a pastor just like you. And so my default response for a long time was, no, I'm not.
Well, and you probably don't even remember this, but when we used to go, because besides when I would bring you up to grandma and grandpa's,
Uh-huh.
which by the way, remember, this is one of those stories I have to share too. You and dad were splitting wood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you were cutting up wood because they had the fireplace and stuff like that. And dad tells the story that you had asked him if you could use the chainsaw, probably, right? Or
Yeah.
axe,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
and dad said, no, you got to wait till you're older or
Yeah.
what, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you said, does that mean when I'm like 35 or 30,
I think,
whatever it
yeah,
was?
33, probably, I think. Because I was
Yeah,
probably like,
whatever, however old I was.
yeah. Yeah.
But
You,
anyway, what else were we just talking about?
I don't know, but
Oh,
I've only used just a quick diversion. I've only used a chainsaw a couple of times in my life, and I don't think I should use one ever again because the first time was with my other grandpa, with Grandpa Wayne, helping him at his house, and he had me go up on a ladder to cut a branch down, and it fell on his head, and later he had to go to the hospital. He had like a bad concussion. And then the other time I took college students on a mission trip to Mississippi, and
yeah.
we were helping this lady clear out her backyard with like overgrown vines and all this stuff. And there was a big branch that was hanging over the chain link fence between her yard and another one. And we decided that we should cut it down because it was going to like fall on the fence or something. Well, somehow I got the chainsaw, which I mean, it was a bunch of college students and myself and some, I don't, anyways, I was supposedly the most responsible one or knew what to do.
They thought you were.
I used to watch a lumberjack show on TV. So, but then it cut the branch down and it was a big branch and it fell right on the chain link fence and smashed this metal fence into the ground. So they were there to help the lady. And then we had to try to straighten out her fence. So, long story short, I don't think, I don't think 30, I might have been 33 then. I should do the
You could have
math.
been. Yeah.
That's crazy. Anyways.
Well, here's one of the other stories I wanted to say is when I oftentimes went up for a meeting, it was only to Brainerd, and that was like an hour and a half drive, maybe two. But mom was teaching, so you would go with me because mom did or subbing or something like that. So a lot of times I would bring you with me, and you didn't have preschool that day, obviously. So anyway, when you would go with me, I would have time to talk with you about all sorts of different kinds of things. And I don't remember what was going on, but I remember at least once or twice I have said to you this: you have to remember this. There will always be some people who will disagree with you and they'll want to do things differently. And there are some times where you just have to do things the way you want to be able to do it, and don't worry about what other people think or feel.
Really?
I brainwashed you.
Huh.
You probably don't remember that, but yeah, I said that to you a number of different times because
I
being
don't
in the
disagree.
church, huh?
I said I don't disagree. Those are some foundational principles in my way of life.
Well, I know. I mean, let's face it, in the church, there's a lot of different ideas, and you pray about it and you try to do the best you can. But if you believe that this is the right thing and it's obviously not sinning against God, you know, and you're being as faithful as you can, you got to follow through with it.
Mm.
So.
Yeah,
Yes, I said that to you a number of different times when you were younger. So it I think you naturally kind of have that as part of your personality, but I reinforced it.
that's good. I don't think I've ever heard that before. So
Yeah, I don't
the
remember if I
truth
ever
comes
told you
out.
that. Yeah, there you go. So should we talk about you and Danny and all
What
the
do
different,
what do you want to say about me and Danny, my best friend growing up?
yes. So when you were in preschool, Seth was in elementary school,
Uh-huh.
and you were in preschool every other day. And but I think it was all day, wasn't it?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think it was all day, but for sure, Danny's mom and dad ended up, they owned a nursery, the planting and all that gardening kind of stuff. And so we had it set up that, and their boys were Sus age, or one of their sons, Sus age. So you and Danny would go to the same preschool, but you guys had like a day off, or I think it was a day every other day.
Hmm.
So we took turns watching you and Danny at our places. And so you learned a lot from obviously Greg and Debbie. And but you and Danny, I would work at home
Hmm.
and I would be at the kitchen table and I would shut the door behind me because that went to the upstairs. And you and Danny would go upstairs, and only later in life did you tell me how the two of you used to walk around, what was it, 3 feet above that railing that went above the steps and
Well,
stuff
we
like
had,
that.
yeah, along the stairs, we had a half wall, like,
Yeah,
banister thing. That was was a hallway on one side and then down to the down the stairwell on the other side. So yeah, we used to walk on top of that. And then we got more daring, and we would walk on it with our eyes closed.
you really?
Oh yeah. And then we would even hang on it, like on the stairwell side, and like shimmy out and see how far we could go, and then
Yeah,
shimmy back. And I remember one time, the Olympics must have been on or something, because I somehow I knew that you could put chalk on your hands to get better grip, because we kept like, so I went down, we had the junk drawer in the kitchen with stuff in it, and I went and
yeah.
found some chalk and went back upstairs, and we were like drawing chalk on our hands. And oh man, yeah, I don't know, I don't know how. So there's some of these things that I think about in childhood, and I wonder, where were my parents,
I
And
was working. I
I
had to
know,
work at home.
I know, but then I think
And I had
about
to shut the door because you guys were so noisy.
I think about my own kids though too, and they do a lot of stuff that I don't know about, that we do hear about later. And I think we're pretty involved parents. I think you were pretty involved parents, but
Oh,
we just
yeah.
gotta live, gotta try some stuff.
Well, if there's one thing I know is having been raised with brothers
Yeah.
and the youngest brother, um, I know there are things that I did that you don't need to know. And of course, there are stories that you and your brother did that I've only found out about a lot later in life.
Well, yeah, that's because, the fear of father is the beginning of wisdom.
Yeah, especially gears that cost hundreds of dollars to repair,
That
but
was
we
that
don't
was not
necessarily have,
that was
huh?
not my it was not my fault. I was underage, and my brother told me that I could drive. So, I I was not my idea.
Yes.
So,
Well,
but
and I have to say, if there's one thing I will say about you overall, what I know about you, and again, I don't know everything you've done, but overall, I'd say you tried to be a rule follower.
that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And yeah. And if there's one thing there, if there's one person that could make you cry, it'd be your mother
Mm,
when you would disappoint her. That would
yeah.
be the one.
Well, I've talked about that. Like, oh, I don't know where I've talked about it. I've shared that story. Like, for me,
Mhm.
I didn't have any I didn't have any fear of like punishment really. Like
Right,
that would like corrected my behavior, but it was disappointing,
right.
you and mom. So that was all I don't know why, but that was always a strong motivating factor in my life. So
Should we talk about my one punishment, my one time I punished you though, when you were a young toddler in the bathtub?
I don't know.
You
Is
don't
that when you
remember this story? This is the story that you give me grief about
that
when I tell the story.
when you spanked me?
When I spanked you because you were standing up in the bathtub. And I had told you before not to stand up in the bathtub because you had already fallen one time and you hit your head, your eye right here at the eyebrow on
Uh-huh.
the faucet. And
Uh-huh.
so I had to take you to the hospital and get stitches on it.
I'm starting to wonder maybe if those two stories are one and you spanked me so hard that I fell and hit my
I did not do that.
Now I know. I know.
So,
I do tell that story about falling and hitting my eyebrow because I was like 1.5 or 2 because I still have a
yeah.
scar there.
Yeah, well, I would think so.
But I don't really know what happened because I was so young. So sometimes I tell the story as I was jumping in the bathtub or I jumped into the bathtub or I slipped. Um, and now my kids give me grief because every time I tell the story, there might be more or less embellishment to the story. And they're like, Grandpa said you just fell. You didn't jump into the bathtub. And I was like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's the only time I ever spanked you.
Uh,
And then I think your mother would say something like, I shouldn't have done that because you didn't know what you were doing. It's like, he did too.
well, the the father
You're a better man for it, son.
the father disciplines those he loves, I guess.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's see.
So,
What else
well,
should we talk about? Huh?
I mean, I was so for those who are listening who don't know, my dad was also a pastor and just retired a little over a year ago after what? How many? 41 years in ministry? 42?
Yep.
42. Yeah. And you knew when you were a little kid that you wanted to be a pastor. Isn't that right?
Yeah. I
I
was
mean, how
probably
was that?
about I was probably about 4 or 5 is what my dad says because I don't really remember this. When I told dad I wanted to be like Pastor Marco, who was my pastor at the time. And yeah, so I never really thought, about doing anything different. And I mean, I liked going to church. I liked falling asleep on my mom's shoulder during the sermon. I remember that,
Yeah.
so. It's probably a good thing I'm a pastor now because most of the time I don't fall asleep when other people do. And it's kind of fun right now being able to listen to you and your brother preach every now and then.
Yeah. It's crazy. The aids of technology, huh?
It is. And then we go to church after that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, what was it like? Because I have things in my own life, like being a father
mhm,
that has deepened my faith in God, my Heavenly Father, or at least
mhm,
my understanding of Him. In particular, like when I think about prayer,
mhm.
how sometimes when teaching about prayer, I'll say, God answers prayers generally in three different ways, no, yes,
Yep.
and not yet.
Right.
And I I've thought about that as a father, as my and it's not just that no, yes, or not yet, but even just as I desire that my children come to me, however it is that they come to me. I'm grateful that they come to me. And so sometimes my kids come to me um, with kind of a begging attitude, begging and
Right.
pleading for something. Sometimes they come very politely asking for something. Sometimes they come kicking and screaming. Like this morning, Ari uh, woke up and he was having a banana, and then he said he wanted cereal with his banana. And according to my knowledge, we were all out of cereal. So I told him that we didn't have any cereal, and that did not go over very well. And he just cried in my lap, just cried until his mom came out, till Abby came out and told me that she had just bought some cereal and it was in our downstairs like pantry area. So mom saved the day. But, in that moment, what all I could do was just hold him and comfort him and console him. And then there are other times too where as a father, just out of the goodness of my heart, I might give something to my children. Uh, you know, I was thinking there's one time that I gave them each like a quarter. This was a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
and just out of the goodness of my heart, a quarter. That's a piece of money, and they were collecting quarters, and so I just gave them all a quarter. And I can't remember which kid. I think it was Hazel. Looked at it and she goes, because they were paying attention to the year of the quarters, and she looked
Yeah.
at it and she
Yeah.
goes, I already have this one. And she tossed it back, you know? And so there's just a lot of layers, where I think about like God and his goodness gives us these gifts. And, even when we don't like deserve it or need it. And sometimes we're like, I don't want that. And I don't know. So there's just a number of those kinds of things. And I'm by no means even a perfect father, as Jesus will say, and God, our Heavenly Father, handles all those. So I don't know. There's a number of those kinds of things that like being a dad. I don't know if I would. I don't know if there's any other way to like fully comprehend God as our Father other than like being a father. I don't know. Are
Right.
there any of those kinds of things like as a dad that you remember like thinking about that increased
Well,
your
yeah, because
yeah.
here's where the other side about being a dad is you're never a dad. Well, I shouldn't say never. With having mom, right? Mom and I had to be in partnership, and we had
Right.
to learn how to discipline the way um, and communicate with you guys, differently than, I mean, because in many ways, grandma and grandpa, both parents, were both Christians, active, and so forth. But um, the discipline that I grew up with was less than the discipline than what mom grew up with. So we had to talk about that's where, and sometimes mom wanted to have more discipline, and sometimes mom wanted to have less discipline. you know. And we had to, but one of the things we did decide is we had to support each other, you know. So like there's that one time where I had put soap in Seth's mouth when he said the bad word at the table, and it was the liquid soap rather than, but I had to take, I said I was going to do it, and we agreed. If one of us does it, the other one has to follow through, right? I remember having soap put in my mouth actually. So I didn't think it was that big of a deal.
I
I
remember
mean, it didn't.
watching that whole thing happen and filing that one away as the little brother going, don't do that one.
Well, and that's kind of the lesson that you learn as far as being a father and a teacher and everything else like that, right? Sometimes you just have to have that one, you got to follow through. And when you follow through, then they know you mean business, right?
Yeah. And yet we're imperfect
Yeah,
fathers in that too. And I mean, I know there are things or ways that I've responded to certain stuff with my kids too um I'm not proud of, and
right.
I've tried to as much as possible talk to them about that, and let them know
But
that yeah.
yeah, well, but one of the things that I will remember more probably about Seth than I do you, and that is when Seth was really little. or a lot younger, let's say one-ish to, toddlerish. And he did something and I had to discipline him. And he cried, kind of like Ari and well, all your kids have cried. I mean, we all cry at some point, right?
I mean,
And I
crying is
remember,
okay.
yeah, it is okay. But then afterwards he wanted to come and give me a hug,
Huh,
which was good for me to know that like God the Father does not want to punish us
right.
or but because he loves us, but out of love you do it so that you can show that there are boundaries. And we in turn, even though we don't want to say we're sorry, oftentimes we have to do that to God, and God in his mercy loves us. And that's, I think, and he demonstrates when we come to him out of love. It's not necessarily, I mean, in repentance, it's not necessarily with a hug.
Yeah.
But we want to be hugged, we want to be forgiven, right?
Yeah.
And
When
in
I
and in
and I
many
think
ways
of
that's what God is.
yeah, when I think about it too, like I think there is a difference between punishment and discipline too.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
discipline has built into that the same word root as disciple, as learning. And so
Hmm.
I think I think you know I mean that this is how I think. Like if we're going to say don't do this, we should
Hmm.
also say instead do this, right? I'm not pleased that this happened, so instead do this. And I think God's word does that for us. I mean, the Ten Commandments are clear, where it's, here's the boundaries, but instead do this. Or at least Luther in his explanations to the catechism is helpful in that explanation,
Right.
where it's, you shall have no other gods. What does this mean? Well, should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. So, yeah, I find that to be a helpful reminder, as a father, but then also God our Father,
Hmm.
the punishment we deserve, he paid for on the cross, right? His wrath was poured out on the cross of Jesus. We don't actually experience the wrath that we deserve. Instead, we're given the grace. We're given that freedom, right?
Right.
And because of that, that should lead us and motivate us to actually desire to do the things that God asks us to do. Not because we have to earn his favor, not because we have to please him, not because he says, do this and then I'll love you. His love
Hmm.
comes first and our response then follows, Yeah.
Well, and one of the things to remember too is Ephesians 6
Mm,
is chapter 5 is where you get the husbands and wives love each other, respect, and so forth. Chapter 6 is about children obey your parents, that has a promise, but it also says before that is fathers don't exasperate or frustrate your children.
mm,
Which I think is really a good reminder to us because what comes earlier there in chapter 5, is that hypostellomai, the willingly place yourself under another, the idea about being a servant,
mm,
and that's where, as a father, this is one of the interesting things too. I'd say I intentionally wanted to help you guys to be leaders, but I also wanted to help you to realize that I, as your father, was also willing to be a follower in the sense of oftentimes like skiing or hiking or many of those other times, I'd be in back, you know, to watch and make sure everybody was. But a lot of times those were with groups too, right? But it was to make sure that nobody fell behind, nobody was hurt, nobody, and that type of thing. But when mom and I and you guys would go up to what you call Oswego
Bluefin Bay.
Ski. Yeah.
It-
And we'd go hiking and you and Seth would go running ahead or whatever the case may be.
yeah.
And there's obviously many more stories about that. But you also remember, do you remember too that when I'd go as the parent supervisor on the tours or the school
Field
trips?
trips. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I was a little more permissive, but I figured you guys wouldn't get hurt.
I don't know specifically what you're speaking about, but
Don't you? Maybe it was more of Seth's. I think it was Seth's group. Seth, we went over by like Taylor's Falls.
yeah.
Those guys climbed around on a bunch of the rocks
Uh,
that they weren't necessarily supposed to be climbing around on.
no, that was not me.
Oh, that was Seth then. His buddies still remember that story,
Oh, really? And nobody died.
thankfully. Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of times like that you got to be able to not be risky, but you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, we hike with our kids a fair amount, up here and do some relatively risky stuff, but the edges and cliffs uh do scare me a little bit more. And I think it's because we have I think there's a certain age though where that they're at least paying attention and they understand the risk. It's
yes.
when they're a little younger, and now we have the span, so
Oh
it's
yeah,
like
you do.
you don't
Hmm.
even we're just like don't I mean there's a general awareness of your body and your situation. Don't fall off the
Yes.
cliff, please. But that also
Yeah.
reminds me of when I was in high school and mom especially would tell us to back away from the edge.
Yes. Yes.
But she
Well,
loves us.
and your youngest, of course, is a little bit more adventuresome than.
Yeah, I don't know. They all have their stuff for sure.
Well, that's where the fun part is as a parent, as a
Yeah.
dad,
Yeah.
because you and Seth were both different,
Yeah.
and we tried to raise you guys the same,
Yeah.
but you can't raise. Um, this is where Seth was more. Well, he was our experiment. Let's just put it that
Well, of
way.
course. Of course.
And so because he was the experiment, he had more limitations. And you obviously were able to watch what he could do and what he couldn't do and what he when he got in trouble.
Yeah. And while
Yeah.
I was, in general, I was a rule follower, I knew how to play the game. I knew watch watching my older brother how to skirt her. Man, our sinful nature and our flesh wants to just do our, not follow the rules. So I will just say that I am not by any means a perfect son or a man. So, but
Should I tell one more story that I
sure,
remember?
tell one more, and then we can wrap it up.
All right. So back in the day when we were in our house, parsonage up in Mora, and we had the television in what used to be the pastor's office. And then in there, so we had the remotes for the TV to turn them on and off and the channels and stuff like that, right? Because I think, did we have cable? I don't remember. We probably had cable up there, right?
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
remember? Well,
at some
it
point we
doesn't
did.
mean
Yeah.
what I remember. It doesn't matter if we did, but what I remember most is this. Then out because that was off to the side and there was a door there, but you'd walk through there and then you'd walk in the living room past the piano. You and Seth were always good about during the commercials stopping by and playing the song on the piano, your practice, on your way to get a snack or something like that. But anyway, we heard Seth and you one time, and you were screaming one time because, you said something about Seth either hit you or Seth wouldn't let you. I don't remember what your excuse was, but your mom and I, of course, believed you because you, being the wonderful young child that you were, would never say and tell a lie or anything else like that. So Seth was, of course, disciplined, whatever. I mean, meaning that you probably got the remote and he had to sit and pay attention and be
He had
mad
to.
at you, knowing,
I think he.
knowing that you just wanted to have it your way. And I'm going to say you bit yourself just because that's the easiest thing to say, but I don't know how you did it. Whatever you did, you said,
I just started screaming because he wouldn't let me watch what I wanted to watch, and you came in, and then he got in trouble because he wouldn't. let me do what I wanted or something. So then
Yeah.
he had to leave the room, and I got the remote and the TV and the room all to myself, and that was great. It paid off, but it was not the
And
right thing
then,
to do.
and then what happened?
I don't know.
Later on, mom or I watched and we saw what had happened or heard what happened.
Yeah.
And we realized that you were actually the one who was being a bad boy and telling a lie and everything else. I
Baja
mean,
Boyka.
yo poika. So anyway, you then were disciplined as a result of that. I don't remember why. Seth probably got to be in there, but instead of you, but
I don't remember
we,
that. I just remember it paying off.
yeah, no, we ended up catching you, shall we say, and
Out of the goodness of my heart, I probably admitted it, Dad. That's probably what happened.
I know you better than that.
Well, fun stuff. But we'll wrap it up here, Dad. And so thanks for doing this. Thanks for sharing stories, and thank you for being a wonderful father and an example and role model. And I tell a lot of people that it's a real blessing to be able to father, you know, in most of the ways, not fathering saying I'm not going to do things that way,
Yeah.
but just really being able to kind of lean into the way that I was raised and trust that that is a good godly biblical way. And so thanks for being a good example.
Well, you're welcome. And I will just simply say it is fun as your father to watch you as a father
Yeah.
with our grandchildren. And because I think you and Abby are doing a wonderful job, with them, at least to the best of your ability, because obviously each one of them is different. And of course, we love each and every one of them
You do.
in their own little ways and everything else. And we look forward to being able to come up and see you guys next week.
Very
So
soon. Yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
All right. Well, hey, one more virtual clink to you, Dad.
Okay,
Cheers.
Bear. Love ya.
I love you too. Bye.
Bye.